Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. On this podcast, we are trying to introduce all of you to something new to watch, usually a show we're going week to week with, but not this week. This week, Sona and I'm your host, Victor, by the way, should always forget to introduce myself, but we will be discussing a binge show, which we rarely do. But of course, this is one of the biggest shows in the world. And originally promoted, this would be the final season of the show. That's how they promoted it last season. But now that season 4 has actually rolled around, Sona, nothing in the press releases mentioned this being a last season. And I think that's pretty clear considering how things wind up for this particular
Yes, I even Googled it after the end because I also had remembered them saying this is the last season.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, this is an interesting way to end it.
And
then when I Googled, I found out that maybe it isn't the end.
Exactly. And that's something that's worth talking about here. And by the way, I have published an episode on the podcast just a couple of days ago where I had watched the entire 10 season binge and had my initial reaction to the episode. And my reaction there, because I was trying to read the show, was very positive in general. I mean, I think people would read as I was describing the show episode to episode and trying to interpret what was there as very positive. Although I was waiting for this conversation with you, Sona, to get your general opinion, because I do have pretty complicated feelings about this season. So anyway, anybody who wants to see more of me basically watching the episodes and reacting to it in real time, do check out the previous episode. I'm very curious to see other people's reactions to the show. I assume it's going to be very mixed. And but I think Sona and I were more positive on last season than the general consensus was. All that is to say that I'm very curious to know general thoughts on Sona's general thoughts on this season of the show. But before all of that, Sona, we haven't talked in 2 weeks, not since we talked about Echo Valley, which seemed to be a very meh Apple TV. The general seems to be the audience reaction, and the general critical reaction was meh on that in general. By the way, Apple TV has a huge success this weekend in F1. Any interest in seeing this Brad Pitt movie at all?
I hadn't had any, no.
It'll be premiering on Apple TV Plus, I'm sure, within whatever their regular window is. But this, of course, is a giant production. So this is something that is released in theaters and has been a phenomenal success around the world. And I think it has a very high audience score. So finally, I think Apple might have an actual hit on their hands, because most of these films they've been putting out, not hits to say the least. Anyway, we could talk about that at some later point. But I did have a question as to what have you been watching? I did notice when I was looking at the streaming charts to see what's popular, always trying to investigate what's popular, what are the people talking about. I did notice there was a very popular reunion episode of The Mormon Housewives, which I'm sure
I haven't seen it yet.
Wow. I see. I just broke some news for you there. So there is a reunion special, so you can watch that at your leisure. Maybe during your time off this week.
Actually, I did finish the regular season of Mormon Housewives. But also, I think your daughter's school ended a week before my son's school. We just ended last Thursday. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the end of year chaos that happens where all of a sudden they're in school, but they're not in school because there's all these special events that, like, either they're out early or you've got to be there, or, you know, all of that chaos. So that's been keeping me busy more than anything else, trying to do that while actually still working full time.
Yes, that was exactly my experience. As a matter of fact, because my wife was away, we had illness in the family, and she was there to help my mother-in-law. And during that week that she was away, that was the week of chaos. So there was like 2 pool parties. There was a Girl Scout event. There was literally every single day. There was my wife had signed up to serve lunch during the field day, which was supposed to be 2 weeks, the week prior to that, but they had to move it. And of course, because it was the end of the year, they had to shove it all into that 1 week. So that week was utter chaos. And then on top of that, the following week was exactly what you described. Not only is it half days every single day, so we have kids in the house constantly on play dates, etc. Then we also have the events where you have to go to the clap out because she's graduating from
And
primary school.
congratulations to her on that.
She made it, yes. And then, of course, the day before we had the actual ceremony. So that's multiple hours of that. So eating up our morning. And of course, the irony of all of this is the one day where I did not have to be on daddy duty. One of our neighbors had been like, I'm going to pick up all the girls and they're going to be at our pool. And their air conditioner broke and it was 110 degrees. So I had to pick up all the kids. And I was telling you off mic all the work I had to do this week because of my furlough this current week. And in the middle of that, I had to run out, pick up all the girls and have them here for a play date in the middle of utter work chaos, having a house full of girls that wanted to be
Isn't
entertained.
that always the way when you're looking forward to like, oh, this is finally the time that I can get something done or have some downtime or whatever it is, life intervenes.
Exactly. And I was like looking at my watch, my phone, which tracks my activity, and the girls needing like snacks every 10 minutes. I was up and down the stairs like 45 times between like taking meetings and then running downstairs to check on the kids and then running upstairs. And they have the sprinkler outside and the lawn is all brown because they have it on all day long. And it's just like utter chaos. And I'm like, great. This was the day I was supposed to get all my work done. And it's the worst day of the week. So anyway, it's all over now because the school year has ended. The usual chaos of life.
Exactly.
Okay, speaking of the chaos of life, let's transition into our conversation about this fourth season of The Bear. As I already mentioned earlier, and you brought up as well, last year they shot season 3 and season 4 at the same time. They released season 3 so they can make their annual. This is pretty amazing, by the way. When you look at these streaming platforms and how they have failed over and over again. They desperately want to do this, by the way, but have failed to get traction. They have a hit show like Poker Face, for example, on Peacock, and then you have to wait over 2 years for the next season, or over 2.5 years or something like that for Severance. All these shows have these giant gaps in production. And now you see something like Your Friends and Neighbors, which we just had covered here in a podcast, very successful show for Apple. And of course, they started shooting the second season and greenlit it even before it came out because they realized, look, we just got to start production to get these things on some kind of cadence. Because if people are fans of a show, we can't disappear for 3 years when everybody else is trying to compete with us at the same time. So they're finally trying to get into this cadence. But a show that somehow miraculously has done this has been The Bear, that in 3 years has released 4 seasons. Every single June has released a season of the show. And part of the way that they were able to commit to this calendar was by shooting season 3 and season 4 at the same time. And they announced that this would be the final season of The Bear. And so we talked about it in our last season coverage of that show. And here we come with season 4. And it's so strange because there's nothing in the marketing now that this is the final season. And honestly, maybe nothing in the show itself, but maybe we could read it. Let's leave that for when we get to the end. Do you feel that this is closure for this story or not? And we can kind of give our opinions there. But before we get to all of that, and before we get to any kind of spoilers, in case people are listening who haven't watched the season so far, Sona, what did you think in general of this season of the show?
Well, I'm curious to hear what you think because I really liked this, but I think in order to really like it, you have to have a certain preference, which it's well established. I like watching people talk to each other.
Yes.
And this season was a lot of people talking to each other and a lot less of the chaos and anxiety and stress of prior seasons, in my opinion. And I think you have to be willing or wanting to see the show evolve to be something different than it started out, which I think can be a hard sell when a show has like a really established fandom to change into something different than what it was.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about the show itself. Of course, first of all, I think you're absolutely right that it is about how we change as people and how expectations change in what we expect out of our careers, out of our personal lives, etc. And it's about that. Now, is that compelling for audiences to watch?
Right.
I'm not sure. And of course, I've said this in our coverage of last season, and even more so, I think, with this season, that this show again has become Christopher Storer, who is the creator of the show. Starting in season 1, there were a lot of different creative forces. He does have a writer's room, so he does work with the same writers over the course of these 4 seasons. But as the show has progressed, he directed, as of I think last season, he directed 7 of those episodes. This season, he directed 9 of those episodes and wrote almost every single episode. And I touched on this with our discussion in season 3, but I think even more so now, this in a way is the story of the show itself, where, it starts off, it's just a sandwich shop, and how, can we make this kind of story resonate with an audience, and then, like, can we elevate what we are? And they did that, and then it changes into a different kind of restaurant, and maybe some people like that, maybe some people don't, but it's aspiring to be this higher version, this more esoteric experience. And then you get to this season, and maybe we'll start breaking down episodes now, but we get to this season, and literally in episode 1, Carmi wakes up, and is Groundhog's Day is on TV. And it's the idea that now that we're doing this every day, it's the same thing every day. It's not chaos. It's not like unexpected, fires and inspections and having to pull off a heist, just to keep the restaurant operational from minute to minute. That now that we've come into this routine and we know what we are and we're successful at it, can we make that challenging ourselves? And maybe it's the people in the show themselves that are saying, like, can we continue to make this a satisfying experience now that we have achieved some kind of equilibrium, some kind of peace? So in that very first episode, by the way, called Groundhogs, and it's funny, when I watched this, I binged it in the first couple of days on the Hulu app. It was like episode 4.1, episode 4.2. And I'm like, what are the titles to these episodes? They can't just be 4.1, 4.2. But now that the app now has the actual titles on the episodes. And that first one is called Groundhogs. And we are going to start breaking down and spoiling the episodes, by the way, for anybody out there. And we'll go one episode at a time. So if you have only seen part of the way, then, feel free to dip out as you watch the show. But I did want to get into some specifics. Not going to break down every single episode and every single plot point, but I did have some big question marks for you, Sona.
Okay, let's hear it.
So in that first episode, we kick things off a little odd. We have multiple recurring dreams, apparently, that we're seeing. One is we see Sydney waking up. She has like this snow is falling onto her face. We don't actually see the context of that full dream until later on in the show. But then we cut directly from that into this really beautiful flashback scene where Carmi is talking to Mikey, and you see that he had pitched actually doing this restaurant. It looks like Mikey had yet another failed business. And then Carmi's saying, well, why don't we do something that we like? And of course, we're talking about making food and creating a community around food, right? So I think that's another very important point about the show, season over season. It's the idea of this experience of bringing people in and making you food and making you feel like you are part of this family is literally the glue that connects a community together. And there's this whole metaphor later on where Richie talks about being the sand rather than being the rocks in this Zen garden. And that's the community, right? The character of a neighborhood is these experiences you have within the community. And of course, that's what family's about. So there's these layers of what the show is trying to explore here. But we have this beautiful thing where Carmi's talking about the pure ideal of creating a community center, a place where people to experience that, and how Carmi's maybe just this juxtaposition and him having this memory that's not what's driving him anymore. So the pure need to be with his family and to create family in his community. And now he's obsessed with changing the menu all the time, challenging himself constantly, getting a good review, getting a Michelin star, none of the things that he supposedly wanted to build with Mikey. And one last thing, of course, in that flashback is we discover, of course, this is where they come up with the bear, the name of the restaurant, because it's about the family, right? The family itself. And very importantly, of course, just prefacing it here, we have maybe the best episode of the season called Bears, which of course talks about like what are the bears. It's not just the Berzados, it's this extended family, right? So we'll get to that. That's probably where we'll spend most of our conversation. But he wakes up from that dream, and so that's that purity of that vision, and then he wakes up to Groundhog Day on TV. And of course, very on the nose, this is not a subtle show. Very on the nose, the idea that he's wrestling with living in this Groundhog Day experience.
I really like the Groundhog Day reference, and I think all of us can relate to that, right? In our regular lives, sometimes you feel like just the relentlessness of this for what, right?
Right.
So I liked that. I do hate a dream sequence, I have to
Yes.
say. So I didn't love kicking it off with the dream sequence because I just, for whatever reason, don't enjoy those. Given their popularity, there must be a lot of people out there that do like them. I'm just not one of them.
Was it that the like snowy imagery, or was it specifically the flashback to Mikey you're talking about there?
No, I love the flashback to Mikey.
Oh, okay. It's the other thing. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Especially when we have no context for it. Like, what is this? What are we watching?
Yeah, and I feel like for whatever reason, episodes often start off with dream sequences, I guess to kind of mislead you for a second. For example, Your Friends and Neighbors had that too, right? Which we just watched. So I didn't like that kickoff, but I did love the conversation between him and Mikey. I thought it was something that, they have continued to do throughout this series, which I love, is, we learn more and more about Mikey as the show goes on, which is an interesting thing because when we start the show, he's already passed away, right?
Exactly.
So I like how we continue to learn more about him and his relationships with all of the characters the more the show goes on.
Of course, another really important thing that happens in that first episode is that Cicero and the computer. By the way, the computer is played by Brian Koppelman, I believe his name is, the writer and creator of Billions, which I know you watch. So just another famous person. I mean, there are so many famous people, not only cameos from famous celebrities, but there's celebrity chefs on this show. There are actual celebrity critics, food critics in previous seasons of the show. I don't think any in this particular season, but so these people are actually known in the food world, of course. And on top of that, you have these behind the scenes famous people. Oh, and of course we see Rob Reiner here as well in this season.
Yes, I didn't realize until after the fact, but yes.
By the way, Spinal Tap 2 is coming out in a couple of weeks, which I believe they came back to direct it. So that could be interesting. Just a little, put a pin in that, everybody. But of course, Cicero and the computer show up with a clock. If you need a ticking time, like every season has had a clock, this season has an explicit clock. This is the countdown. This is like basically where their buffer of extra cash will run out. It's 2 months. And at the end of that 2 months, the bear is out of business. That's basically what they're being warned because they're bleeding cash that quickly. And Carmi and Sydney Carmi primarily decides to shift their focus to getting a star. They're like, hey, if we get a Michelin star, will that keep us afloat? And Cicero's reaction is, well, maybe we'll see. Let's see if we get that star, and then maybe we'll see how business goes from that point on. And one really important thing to bring up as well is that as they're trying to tighten their belts and cut costs, Richie keeps hiring more people, but very importantly, he hires the front of house for Ever. So it's like the disillusion of Ever allows some of the DNA of Ever to come to this restaurant, and two really fun things happen here. We see this montage at the end where the Ever front of house, who've been doing this for years and incredibly proficient, are now making the restaurant run smoother and smoother. We see the line bending. And most importantly, on the soundtrack, we have Tangerine Dream, the soundtrack from Thief, which is basically a heist movie. Michael Mann, very famous, his very first film he directed. Great film, by the way, which I just saw last year for the first time. But, it's as if this, like the mundanity, the 9 to 5 Groundhog Day of getting slightly more efficient has been like framed as like, this is the heist we're trying to pull off. Can we be 2 seconds
Tina
more
make the
efficient?
pasta in less than 4 minutes.
Can we make the pasta in 30 seconds faster? And the music's like dun 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 dun. And I guess like that is the trick of the show. Can, like you said before, can you take the mundane tasks of life and make it a challenge in and of itself?
I will say, as an aside,
Mhm.
we often talk about the music that's used in a series, and I love music, and I think we've watched a lot of shows where the music's used really effectively. And I think here they were trying to do a lot with the music that
Yeah.
was chosen for this particular season, almost perhaps too much. It
Yes. Mhm.
started feeling a little heavy-handed halfway through the season. Like felt like I was noticing the music more than I should be. Did you get that at all?
You know what? I agree, but it didn't bother me as much because
It was good music.
yes, but I also clued in. I mean, I'm more attuned to the music. I mean, you are as too, as you're pointing out here, but I'm even, I think, a little more so even than you, where I can spot the reference right away. And the reason I mentioned that is because it didn't bother me because it was so on the nose, because these
Mm.
songs have all been in the show before. So including this Tangerine Dream score, by the
Mhm.
way. So the reason I mentioned that is that by the time we get to the end of the season and we hear that the show must go on, Bruce Hornsby song, which is
Yeah.
nearly, it's like practically the first song we heard ever on the show. So it is like we are revisiting
Mhm.
the season, I should say the structure of the show up until this point. So I saw it's very intentional. I do agree. It's stylistically, there's a lot of heavy-handed stylistics, and I know people are critical of that now. I find it funny that critics have some of these opinions now when I'm like, that has been the style of the show the whole entire time. I'm not
Yeah, I
saying
get
it's
your point there.
I'm not saying I love all the decisions, but I'm like, you can't complain about it now and then loved it before. It's like it has been there. It's in the DNA of the show itself.
Yeah, I feel like it was more noticeable in this
Yes,
season,
I
maybe
agree.
because it was a quieter season.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think that's what's more jarring about it. It's a quieter season, and then we have the music come in because very much intentionally they're like using the music in a different way than they did earlier. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned, when someone's just kind of in a conversation and suddenly the music comes in, you're like, well, why are they doing this right now? So yeah, it's probably draws attention to itself more so than previously. But like I said, for me, I was reading it as very intentional that they are
Yeah, I get that.
referencing previous. So it was just part of the style of the show, which I mean, your mileage may vary for sure. I agree. And some of the songs I think work better than others. Like, for example, I'll just preface it now that even though I like the song, that when Carmi goes and sees Claire again, that immediately, like when they're just talking to each other on the steps, suddenly we hear that strange, what's that song called? The REM song, Strange Frequencies.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember it was REM. I don't remember the song.
anyway, it's just very funny because that's like their romantic theme song. So I
Mhm.
was like in my head, I'm like, and now Strange Frequencies is going to start playing, and it did. So like it's so on the nose. So that was just like, okay, well, I got to expect a lot of these musical cues basically, and for good and bad, let's say. So yeah, I loved seeing the Ever cast brought in here. By the way, very frustrating that Richie still can't make a move on this. The what do you call the head of staff?
Yeah, I don't know, but I know what you mean about this lady and their romantic energy. Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Maybe
sure
now
he
that this
doesn't want to
wedding is
be.
over, he can move on.
Yes, yes. I mean, he doesn't want to. I guess want to be unprofessional, definitely, especially considering his new life philosophy. But I mean, just ask her to go get a drink with you after you leave at 1 o'clock in the morning. Which I mean, you guys are. Who else is around at that hour? Just
Yeah.
go grab a drink and see what
Yeah.
happens. Episode 2 is called Soubise. I think that's how you pronounce that, which I think is the sauce in the pasta dish that Tina is trying to improve every single week. And I was trying to figure out, outside of this conversation, what the symbolism of each one of these titles was. And one is, I think that this is obviously a sauce that needs to basically be prepared ahead of time and has a lot of different flavors and has to age a little bit. So maybe it's about the team cohering. It's also made out of like very basic ingredients. And of course, we very importantly find out that they're getting less and less
Oh
ingredients
my
because
gosh, down to
as
two components by the end. Holy cow.
exactly right, 2 components per dish, and I guess salt and pepper. That's about all you get. But so yeah, so I think it's a combination of how do you make something good out of simple ingredients, but still requires time and skill and consistency. So I guess that's what it's about. But I mean, this is very much a, I can imagine people being frustrated with maybe episode 2 and episode 3, where it really is just the team doing their thing and trying to get better at it. And it's such a hang. And I do appreciate that this is trying to be more contemplative and, trying to give the characters room to breathe. So I like that part of it. But I can already hear the critical, or I should say the social reaction that like nothing's happening. Did it work for
Right. Well,
you, or were
that's
you? Yeah,
why, yeah, I feel like if you're not ready to evolve with the show, it's
right.
going to be a big problem for you because it is such a shift in tone from the
Yes.
beginning.
Mm-hmm. Of course, another important thing happens here where Carmi is talking to Tina and she's asking for advice, etc. And she gives him a little bit of advice, which is go see your niece, which he has somehow forgotten that even exists.
Insane. Bananas.
But he does eventually have this conversation. It's kind of the culminating point of the episode where he talks to his sister and she's like, oh yeah, I'll pay that bill tomorrow. I know what you're calling me about. And he's like, no. I actually want to talk
Mhm.
to you about my niece who I've not yet seen. And in this kind of really touching conversation, she basically says to him, it's okay if you don't want to cook anymore, which of course plants a seed in his mind. I didn't how do you read Carmi here? Because I honestly, with the first 2 episodes at this point, thought that he's really taking his foot off the gas. He's obviously no longer pushing himself and pushing the team in this very toxic way. He's letting them make their own decisions. And I think we touched it on this back all the way back when he's locked in the fridge at the end of season 2, where when he suddenly was not there and he's freaking out in the fridge, they had like one of the best nights of their lives. So he hadn't realized that yet, but he had gotten the team to a mature enough place where they were more functional without him than with him. And I guess he's coming to that realization in this season. But what did you think? Like, I actually was reading him as maybe being depressed before. I think it's only over the course of the season that it's like maybe he's coming to this deeper understanding of the dynamic in the group.
To address your comment without getting into a spoiler for a later episode, there was one point in watching this that I was afraid he was going to take his own life. So I
Yes. Mm-hmm.
also thought that maybe this was telegraphing some sort of depression. But again, taking the whole, it seems like he has been doing a lot of work on himself somehow
Yeah.
without a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, which is very impressive. Although I guess he is still going to those
He
meetings,
goes
which
to
is
Al-Anon meetings. Yeah,
right,
exactly. Which seem to be
which is
very
something.
therapeutic.
And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to get back to what we were talking about in the beginning about just how TV is produced now, this show in particular has like kept a good pace, which I appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I've talked about this before, for people that are fully grown adults with families and with full-time jobs, I would appreciate a little previously on sometimes.
Yes.
When I think this show has so many great callbacks and references, but I do not have the space in my memory bank to be holding on to those details from season 2 of The Bear when I have to remember my kid has no after school today. I got to go pick him up, otherwise he's going to be there. You know what I mean? Like, just a little like tickle my memory a little bit because when I saw him at the Al-Anon meeting, then I was like digging in my memory a little bit, like, oh, yes, we've seen this before. I guess he's been doing this the whole time, right?
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
like, just, a quick previously on with him at an Al Anon meeting would have been nice to just ease me into that. But yeah, so apparently he has been contemplating quite a lot. I personally, at this point in the show, thought, though, that I thought it had to do more with interpersonal dynamics, but he still had the passion for cooking, I thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, we'll have to leave that for final thoughts on the show. I think that would have to be the direction the show would come into, that maybe he is throwing out the baby with the bathwater here in his own analysis. But maybe that if there is a season 5, maybe that's where he needs to come to that understanding that there is a balance between the two things. I totally agree, by the way, with something you just said, where at one point in the show, I'm like, there's no way that they're trying to keep drawing these parallels to Mikey, as in
Right.
it's time for him to do this, right? Because I'm like, oh my
Right.
God. And then luckily, maybe I was thinking maybe right now at episode 2 was when I had those darkest thoughts, because then he starts to try to connect with people. He goes and sees Sophie. He goes and reconnects with Claire and other family members. So he seems to come out of this funk. But there is a moment where I absolutely thought the same thing. I'm like, there's no way. Can you imagine the show ended there? Like, wow, what a dark, dark ending for this show.
I'm happy you're saying that, because when I said it just now, you were quiet. And I was thinking, oh, Victor is like, wow, she really just went off the deep end with that one.
No, I just wanted to let you talk because I had a similar thought. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts without interrupting, which I often do, unfortunately. Tried to get better at that. I'm working on myself. So
No, you're doing great. As someone who has known you for decades, you are doing amazing at giving people space to express their thoughts, because I know you have a lot of enthusiasm for what we're talking about. So it's hard to keep yourself from jumping in.
Yes, I've gotten much better at it. And I guess this is so funny that we're just having this conversation, and it's making me think about a couple of things. I have gotten better at making space in conversations because of this podcast. And so that's part of me training myself to have more space. And I think it's probably been good for my relationship with my daughter and my wife, for example.
Oh, isn't that great?
Isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I've talked before about, I think we both have the same issue of the cooperative overlap. Like
Yeah.
it's interrupting, but it's interrupting because you're excited and you want to share what you think because it overlaps with what the person is saying. So
Right.
it comes from a good place, but yes, it can be difficult. Sometimes you assume you know how the sentence is going to end, but you're wrong, right?
You're a steamroll the other person, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I was going to say, that actually dovetails with something I was going to say specifically in this episode, which is that as in a strange way, that this podcast myself has improved my ability to make space in conversations and maybe listen more closely. On top of that, there is the kind of a thematic overlap with the show itself. And what I was going to say is, not only are we seeing these people who are very dysfunctional, and like you said, Carmi is doing a lot of therapeutic talk, even though he doesn't seem to be in therapy, but he does go to these Al-Anon meetings. And a lot of that is him listening to other people. And via listening to these other people, he's making revelations about himself. He's changing himself. And I do wonder, is that a theme of the show? Not only that, for example, Richie is someone who would probably never go to therapy. He's not the right person for that demographic, or has his own biases, etc. And maybe, it's just not something in his friend group or in his class group that he would consider. And yet he's having that experience through the doing at this restaurant.
Yes. So many things can be therapeutic. Yes.
And then a bigger point I ask you as well is, do you think that maybe that is something that the show itself is trying to do, that by getting these characters who are so toxic and contentious, and then very intentionally having this trajectory of peace and a healing, that they want the show to be that in some form? I mean, I just thought of this right now, but maybe this is an intentional thing that the show is trying to do.
Interesting. I think it could be. I think it's an acknowledgement of all of the chaos and stress that we all love, right? But was it healthy for us or anybody in this show?
Right.
I mean, that energy can drive you, but for how long and to what end? And so I think, maybe the show is about realizing that nobody can run like that on that in a healthy way for all that long.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe the more direct question I had for you is, and this is an unanswerable question, more an opinion than anything else, but do you think that their audience, some audience that is really vibing with this show, that it is therapeutic for them in their own lives?
I feel like so much depends on your own personal perspective and life experience and what you are willing to admit about yourself and your life and what you want your life to be and what you see mirrored back at you and whether you're willing to admit that you're looking in a mirror, which I think is something that they really directly go for in this
Yes.
season. Uh, so I think it can be that, it's so interesting to me how sometimes two people can watch the same movie, TV
Yeah.
episode, whatever it may be, and the takeaway is completely different. Like even you and I, when we talked about that movie, Echo Valley, right? In the final scene, you thought it was a foregone conclusion what the mother-daughter relationship would be, and I thought it was very open-ended. And I think we bring so much of our life experience to that interpretation, probably, right? So I think it really can vary.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about these things now, but it is interesting. I mean, my daughter has just suddenly become on a kick now of rewatching all the Bluey episodes
Oh,
as
love
just this
Bluey.
very week as I was watching The Bear. And I made me think about that as well, that, the Bluey itself, and maybe that's why it blew up during the post COVID, that it is, in a way, it's a form of family therapy, right? Just watching that show together is a form of unspoken family therapy. And maybe The Bear is doing a similar thing.
I think, like therapy, if you are willing to be open to it, it can be. I mean, so much about therapy is, they have this phrase like, are you willing to do the work?
Right.
Because it's so easy to just go to therapy and talk about whatever and walk out and move on with your day. I mean, doing the work is really painful, like really reflecting on the most painful things that have ever happened to you and how they've affected you. And I think it's the same, if you are open to it and willing to see how this reflects something that's going on in your life, then I think it can be very therapeutic. I found certain parts of this season very therapeutic to watch.
Yes, I agree. And just like family therapy, some members in that room will find it very rewarding, and someone will be like, boring, which is
Right. Waste of time. I can't believe you paid hundreds of dollars for this.
which is
Yes.
going to be the critical reaction to this season of
Yes.
television as well. All right, I should say, episode 3 is called Scallop. This one again, directed by Christopher Storer. Practically the entire season. There's only one outlier for the entire season. But
Can I say one
yes,
thing before we go on? Because I'm
yes,
not sure what episode it happened in, but I thought it was such a clever thing that they did because we open with that Groundhog Day reference. And then in one of these first few episodes, I want to say it's in the first three, uh, Richie and Carmi are talking at the end of the night. Richie's leaving, and Carmi says, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And Richie says, that's today.
right,
Tomorrow is today.
yes,
And I
yes,
thought that was a nice full circle with Groundhog Day because, Carmi feels like he's stuck in today over and over
yes.
and over. And Richie's pointing out that, like, no, time is moving. This is tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, it's exactly the moment we see in that's included here in the show where Bill Murray's character tries to stay up until 6 a.m. and then the clock switches over and it repeats again. Like he can't sleep past it. It has repeated again. The pattern repeats. And it's the same thing like, oh, tomorrow is today. Explicitly the case.
Yes.
So yes, Scallop, episode 3. This one is called Scallop, and most importantly, maybe just the central point of this whole episode. Sydney, and oh, by the way, in my solo episode on this, I was talking about how these individual episodes mirror previous episodes or previous interactions in previous seasons. And I think very important, the reason that this episode is called Scallop and why it's so important. Sydney makes the scallop dish and he says, it's perfect. It's more than perfect. We're putting it on the menu right now. We're going to, and it makes it a little bit of a challenge to integrate it into the rest of the food and everything else. So he does make a little challenge out of it, but he also is just unequivocally saying to her that this is a perfect dish, which of course you think about that earlier season 2 or season 3, I forget which episode it is, where she's just working on that dish and working on a dish and they're yelling at each other. And he's like, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. And part of that is, yeah, maybe the dish still needs a little bit of work, but he's not just telling her, you just got to make this little change and you're there. He's not being a positive partner. He is trying to be that tough teacher, that negative mentor that he had, a tour mentor that he had earlier in his career. And then the McHale, what's it, Joel McHale character from earlier seasons of the show. So he's playing that role in that particular case. But here we have the exact opposite. He is now again, over and over again, saying, what happens if I don't talk right now? Do they figure it out themselves? And they do, over and over again, solve the problem, fix it in a way he wouldn't have thought of, or in a better way sometimes than he would have. And he's allowing them that space. And he does it again here with Sydney. And she's like shocked that he just is open to her. But again, this is maybe this is the moment, by the way, Sona, where I started thinking, is he going to kill himself? But yeah, so because he's maybe a little too laissez-faire on things, but
I mean, it's 180 degrees
yes,
from what we saw previously, where she was begging for his attention and validation, and he was very purposefully not giving it. All of a sudden, it's all coming very easily. All the suggestions are being accepted, right? Like you can see she doesn't know what to do with it.
A couple of more important things that happen here. One is you can bring it up all now if you want, or save it for the end. But I'll just mention that it begins in this episode. The whole subplot where Ibraheem is coming up with this idea to one of the things that makes this show feel like it's not done, because this is something that is literally planting a flag and then leaving it completely open-ended as to how to interpret what happens here. But Ibraheem is looking for ways to save money, and he has made the sandwich shop more and more efficient. Their costs are going down and down. They are now, this is just like a little recap of it, they're 75% of their cash flow from the previous year, but more cash positive because they're only open for 2 hours a day, and their cost of labor, cost of supplies has all gone down. And then this is where the Rob Reiner character comes in as this consultant, Albert Schnur, who eventually, over the course of this whole season, comes up with this idea being like, well, look, you guys are so profitable. Imagine having little satellite spin-offs, franchises of these stores, and the kind of money you could be making, which, of course, in and of itself, completely underdeveloped in this season, would probably be able to finance this entire operation.
Agree.
I don't know if you want to say anything else about it or save it to the end on kind of final thoughts, because it just seems that they spent a lot of time on this, and it really doesn't lead to anything by the end of the season.
It doesn't lead to anything explicit, but I think it's implicitly there that we know that this restaurant will be able to continue if they put this plan into action.
Right. Very good point.
So in that way, I mean, it would have been nice to have it a little more explicit, but I was happy they had this scene with Rob Reiner's character and the computer where, it seems like, yes, this is really going to go someplace rather than just being theoretical. So I did like that they at least gave us that. I think it could have gone a step further. I think also they left this character kind of not mysterious, but I don't know about you, but there was this feeling of, where did this guy come from? And is he a scam artist? And
at first I was like,
yeah, it's just a Ponzi scheme. Exactly. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, being in the podcast business and seeing people who like give podcast advice, they're all like trying to sell their consulting services. I'm like, is this guy a podcaster? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. It just seemed a little bit strange. So yeah, it was, I mean, maybe purposefully so. I don't know.
Yeah. He seems to be a good, honest broker by the end of the whole thing.
Yes.
But it is pretty funny. The way he oversells himself, being like, I've worked for Fortune 500 companies, and I've worked for like, whatever, like a seamstress in your neighborhood. I'm just like, okay, that's quite an interesting resume there.
Exactly.
Oh, another beautiful thing that happens here, and it pays off later as well, is that there's this real focus on, if we're going to get that Michelin star, we have to try to identify who the critic could be. And there's these patterns, they use these names and yada, yada, yada. But Richie's general philosophy is, how do we make this a special event for everybody? If we make it for everybody, well, then we definitely are going to capture the particular critic. And they end up having this whole event where they have fake snow outside, and they serve beef sandwiches at night off menu. And this family has this incredible experience. And of course, there happens to be a critic from Food and Wine. I forget which magazine he's from, who
Yeah,
happens just to
Food
be
and
there
Wine.
at the time and sees this event. And of course, gets a very positive write up by the end of the season, which once again is just a dangling thread as to whether it drives traffic to the restaurant or not. And also, very importantly, that one of their chefs, and maybe I won't get into it now in case people are watching along, but there is a review published by the end of the season. And of course, there's a lot of hype around Marcus's desserts. And again, we see very similar to Scallop, we see this kind of unreserved, unabashed love from Carmi on this new dessert. But most importantly, he says, wow, this people are really buying a lot of these desserts. I need a little extra help. And they bring in a stage, which happens to be Luca. Luca is back. Will Poulter playing Luca shows up. And this is all very funny. I really like the fact that you have Marcus's best friend who is also selling his mom's house.
Yeah.
That there's this whole subplot where he's very jealous of this new friendship with Will Poulter. He's like attracted to him too. It's very, very funny. The whole thing is every time he's like, oh, I hate that guy. He's so handsome.
I know.
It's very funny.
No, that was great. And I will say I really loved the scene with the family and the snow and all of that. I think this season could have done with a couple of more scenes like that because I understand the whole idea of like it's not really about the restaurant, right? Like which is almost the case with every TV show that it's not really like Ted Lasso. People say it's not really about soccer.
Right.
But at the same time, that is superficially what it's about. And I mean, there was a lot in the kitchen happening, or enough for me in the kitchen happening with the scallops and the amazing dessert and all of that, the pasta dish. But I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the interaction with the customers and them trying to make it special for them.
Yeah, two things to follow up on that is I forgot to bring this up completely in our conversation, but of course, all the way back in episode 1, another thing that happens in that really the first 5 minutes of the whole season are so packed with, the dream sequence, the flashback, the, Groundhog's Day reference.
And the review, we find out what happened in the review, which was
exactly.
The
That's the thing I forgot to bring up is exactly that of course the review came out and now we actually get to read the review. And very funny. If this show had not been shot at the same time as season 3, you can imagine everybody, all the critics who are watching the show now would be like, oh, that's the show creators reacting to the critical reaction of season 3 of the show. Mm-hmm. That it's like, it's all over the place. Yeah, the food is good, but the menu's a mess. And there's so much chaos behind the scenes, right? So it's like, it's like almost like it would be intentional, if not, but maybe it is all by design, by the way, because they're commenting on themselves. But the going back to that menu, I think that is key, right? That, they're talking about how the experience at the restaurant is chaotic, even if the food is good, or at least uneven, and confusing. The menu is confusing. It's different things all the time. There's not like themed in any way. So all of that is important context here, because not only do we see that they have to simplify their menu, they need to get fewer ingredients, they need to streamline their processes. But beyond all of that, is that one of the themes here, going back to his conversation with Mikey, is that the place is a communal space, right? Which is what the beef became, right? It became like a hangout for the community. So the whole idea, to your point, of creating more of those scenes, which I completely agree, they need to have those special events, because that is what the show is trying to say, right? That they're trying to create a special place for the community.
Yes.
It's not about the food. I mean, it's about the food because the food is what draws the people, but then it's about the community afterwards. And we need to see the community, not just of course, there's the community of the employees and this family, this extended family that keeps getting bigger and bigger. But yeah, what about the front of the house? Like, what about the repeat customers where this is their favorite restaurant and this is where they hang out and this is where they know everybody who's there and they know Richie by name, etc. That is what makes a restaurant a staple in a neighborhood. And we do need to see a little bit more of that, I think. And what else happens in this episode? I think we hit all the important things. Oh, of course, most importantly is when he goes and has this conversation with Claire as well. I mentioned this in my solo recap. I watched this episode with my wife. I think it's the last. No, we watched the first 4 episodes together. 3. No, only the first 3.
It's
Now we're
about the same as my husband and me. I guess both of our spouses were like, okay, that's enough after that.
well. She went to sleep at that point. I stayed up and watched a couple more, and then I watched the rest the next day. She has now watched a couple more, so she's like one day behind where I am, basically. But going back to that point, the Claire conversation. These people love to talk. I found it very funny. I just thought this whole scene would play out like honestly in the real world after those apologies and those awkward interactions and maybe a little angry back and forth. What actually would happen was they would go on a couple of dates and she would
I agree.
slowly earn his trust back, or he would get her trust back, or not. If he started becoming erratic again, they probably wouldn't see each other anymore. So all of this was a little contrived, but these people do like to talk things out or not, right? This is another counterpoint to, of course, that whole sequence in season 3 where Carmi literally is just frozen in place. I think he's in the meat locker again, possibly, and he refuses to call her back. But here he lays it all out there.
Well, I liked the comic relief of the intro of it where she's not here. Are you sure she's not here? Why are you here? All of that was good.
Yes.
And I thought the facts were used much more effectively this season than last season, where it was too much.
Mm-hmm.
Here it was the perfect amount of comic relief from them, I think. So I enjoyed that. For whatever reason, this conversation did not have as much emotional resonance for me as I think it could have and should have.
Yep.
I appreciated what he was trying to do, and I think it showed a lot about his growth as a character and all of that. But as far as it actually kind of hitting me in my heart, it didn't do that.
Yeah. It's like they didn't know how to write the conversation. I would have honestly preferred maybe a couple of outbursts and then more silence between them, because I just didn't feel like the conversation flowed in any natural way. I do agree that when one of the facts is there answering the door, so funny, and 100% agree. I was so fed up with the whole facts
too much
season. I'm like, okay, you can't just be like, we don't have comedy in this season of the show, so we're literally just going to cram them in. And the exact opposite here. We see him here. They just sprinkle it in, like the correct seasoning in this dish, that they sprinkle him in here early on. And then they are more and more in the show as we go forward from this point, and always hysterically funny when they're in the show. I'm like, wow, this is the way to use these characters, which is so good. Like they really got the balance right. I do wonder, obviously they shot this ahead of time, but I do wonder if they did take that criticism and then maybe edit this season, which of course they have a lot of footage. I'm sure there's a lot of scenes that are cut or used or alternate takes, etc., and maybe really distribute them across the season in a way where they to optimize their usage. Because I thought that was a perfect usage of them. I always welcomed whenever any of the facts showed up on the show this season, and really was just utterly exhausted with them in the previous season.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
And of course, one last thing, after this conversation with Claire, maybe realizing there's a couple of times here where he dips out of work, or he just kind of flakes out in the middle of the day and goes and has experiences outside of work. And of course, this is one where he's trying to reconnect with Claire. We'll know more about this later, but of course, this episode ends with him calling up Pete in the middle of the night, 1:00 in the morning or something. And he's like, why are you calling me at 1:00 in the morning? Because he desperately needs to talk to him, because he needs to change the partner agreement. And we'll know more what that means later. Again, worrying me.
Yes. That was the key thing for me that made me think maybe something really bad was going to happen.
Yes. Luckily, that's not. But maybe, like, now that I thought that maybe I was overreading things, it's funny to hear you say the same. So maybe the showrunners did want us to have that in the back of our mind, this possible dark outcome. And then maybe that makes us accept Carmi's decisions more as the show progresses, because if that is the alternative, then this is obviously a healthier route.
Right.
But ideally, of course, we can find balance in our lives. All right, next episode.
Because it made me think of one of the warning signs or red flags is people giving their things away, So.
Okay, the next episode is Worms. This episode, not directed by Christopher Storer, and written, by the way, by Ayo Edebiri and Lionel Boyce. Interesting that they wrote this episode themselves. But I also want to bring up the fact that Ayo Edebiri directed only one episode of the show last season, Sona, and it's the Tina flashback episode, which is maybe the best episode the show has ever had. So not only has she become a star in front of the camera, maybe a star behind the camera as well, but writing this episode where she goes to get her hair braided by her cousin, played by Danielle Detweiler, two-time Oscar nominee, Danielle Detweiler, by the way.
Oh, for what?
She played the mom in the movie Till.
Oh, yes, Emmett Till. Okay, gotcha.
Yes, Emmett Till. And she plays the mom in that movie. And then last year, she was nominated for Denzel Washington's son, made an adaptation on Netflix of The Piano Lesson.
Ah, okay.
And I just saw her in a horror movie recently, accidentally. I thought I was seeing a different movie at a preview, and it was a different movie, and it was very good. It's called 40 Acres. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. Anyway, so she goes to see her cousin, and her cousin has run out of hair extensions and leaves her with, very uncomfortably, speaking of people who have not balanced their lives and their personal lives, leaving her uncomfortably with her 10-year-old cousin. What is it when your cousin's
child? Is that a second cousin? I don't know.
Cousin, right?
I honestly don't know.
I forget. It's some form of cousinhood.
Yeah.
And she's 10 or 11. And I can vouch for girls at around this age that, yes, they can be kids sometimes. And then 1 minute later, they're basically acting like teenagers, moody teenagers. And the toggle switches arbitrarily from moment to moment. They bond over not being invited or being invited to a sleepover for the wrong reasons, possibly. And in this strange sort of way, Sydney tries to correlate this to her own situation where she's like, do I want to hang out with my old friends? Do I want to hang out with my new friends? I also like this whole idea of like bonding over food again, right? She struggles to communicate with this young girl left in this very awkward situation, but she can make food. And again, making a meal for somebody, something so basic, right? She even says it. Hamburger helper is just a pasta or a starch and a protein and some seasoning, the most basic fundamentals of any kind of meal. And she makes her something to eat. And they bond over this, and they bond about gummy worms as well. Terrible for her teeth, but she still likes them.
I loved this episode, and I loved the interplay between her and Shapiro, where
yes,
he thinks she's going to be done in like an hour, and she's trying to explain, no, this is a larger commitment. And then his, very tone deaf explanation later of, I watched Good Hair since the last time we talked.
I love that detail, which is like such a thing that people say, like they're trying to commiserate on something they know nothing about. Like this is the one point I know of commonality here.
Which, by the way, she says she hasn't seen.
She hasn't watched it. Exactly.
Yeah,
it's great.
I love that too. I loved the interactions between her and her cousin's daughter, and the analogy of, the two houses and how she's describing them, and that the daughter in the end knows exactly what she was saying and says you should cook wherever you want to cook, right? That like she totally understood what Sydney was playing with in her head. What I didn't understand is everything about that episode made me think she would be leaning towards staying at the Bear, but in the end, she calls Shapiro, and I didn't get that. So I wonder if there was something in the episode that either I missed or something that was missing that makes that make sense.
I'm honestly just analyzing it here now that we're talking about it, and I think I have a read on it. But what I'd say in really basic terms, I think she's making the decision to go with Shapiro because it is the decision that makes sense. There's a ticking clock that is now down to weeks at this point in the show. And, what is going to happen after that? And, and once again, even more than that is Shapiro is telling her all the things about like, you're going to build this from scratch. And there's going to be like an HR department and stuff like that. So she's probably not going to get screwed over, etc. So it is the smart thing to do. But I think thematically, what this show is telling us is that you can't help but think about Sydney in the context of her family herself, where she doesn't really fit in, right? She's a food nerd. And how many food nerds, these people are, concerned with their day-to-day existence, people like that are not, eating at ritzy restaurants. So she's not, I mean, you're already in that situation whenever you're obsessed about becoming a chef, for example, in any context, but maybe even more so where she's coming from. And then you have the whole conversation, like you mentioned with Shapiro, where he's like saying the right things and, oh, I watched Good Hair, and he's trying to do the polite thing. And she could have that kind of interaction, but she's not really going to fit in there either. So she's always awkwardly trying to fit in. It goes back to the analogy of the girl trying to, am I hanging out at did they invite me to the sleepover for the right reasons, for the wrong reasons? What's going on here? And having to think about how awkward that is. And then she has family, right? The bear has fully accepted her. These are people that she knows, good and bad. She knows who they are, and that's her actual family. So I agree to your point that I think what the show is telling us here is that inevitably she has to stay at the bear. But I think that as far as her choosing Shapiro, I mean, on paper, it just makes more sense, right? It's just the practical choice. And I think that's what they're trying to represent here. But yeah, this is interesting to have these bottle episodes. And of course, talking about mirroring episodes from the past, we saw when Marcus obviously went to Copenhagen as a bottle episode. And when we saw Richie stage for the first time at ever. So yeah, this is another one of these bottle episodes where we just kind of have an individual member of the team off in the world and how they interact in that world. All right, the next episode, I can't parse this title, by the way. I tried to previously, I still can't. It's called Replicants. Replicants is a reference to Blade Runner, human-like androids. They are called replicants. And we even see Ridley Scott talking. Every once in a while, we see that Richie is watching these videos about making movies. Apparently, he's like a thwarted filmmaker or actor. We've seen it mentioned multiple times that he always wanted to be an actor. Maybe Christopher Storer again talking about himself to some extent. But regardless, we have this replicants reference. We actually have Ridley Scott talking about making the Blade Runner movie. So I'm not sure why this episode's called Replicants. But this is the episode where Carmi's at that Al-Anon meeting. And what do you think about this opening sequence where this woman is telling the story about this dysfunctional relationship with her brother?
I honestly probably did not examine that story as much as I could have because I was too busy trying to dive deep in my memory for Carmi's past Al-Anon experiences,
Yes.
as I just described. Tell me your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Carmi, we've seen him in Al-Anon multiple times. There is one extended sequence, very famously on this show, where Carmi is talking about really laying out the whole relationship with his brother and what happened to his brother, etc. And it's like basically him talking for, I don't even know, 15 minutes straight while the camera just pushes in and everybody listens to him talk. For me, I just thought that the story was an interesting metaphor. I think this is where Carmi, again, is thinking about how he needs to get out of the way because this is basically this woman talking about this brother in her life and is basically just injecting this chaos into her life. And I think that Carmi is starting to question explicitly by the end of the season whether he is the chaos agent now. And, he was always the one who was the order within his own family, but now have they, in a way, evolved, and he is now the chaos agent himself.
But in the end of the story, right, the brother is unscathed, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh, yeah. He says, I watered the plants or whatever it was.
Right. And he's not
I destroyed your house, but I did water
or,
the plants.
yeah.
I followed my word, but, despite all the other chaos involved.
Yeah. I'm not sure what to make of that. It's probably something, and I'm just missing it.
I mean, I just thought it is. I think it goes back to the idea that he is like, we're going to get our Michelin star. And he's like, I'm sticking to my promise.
Yes.
But in the meantime, it's like, yeah, but
all this other crap goes with it.
I destroyed the house. I ruined your restaurant. I ruined your life. Sense. But hey, I did what I said I was going to do.
Right.
And I think maybe he sees a little bit of an overlap there. I mean, this is another one of these real chill episodes, to be honest. There's a lot of connective tissue here. Marcus sells the house. Finally, he has to get like another signature on there. Luca becomes part of the team. Carmi agrees to Sydney that they're going to have a set menu from now on. Everyone's shocked by this.
It is shocking after his commitment to the chaos last season.
He admits that the changing menu was what undid the restaurant. And of course, this episode ends really beautifully with Natalie showing up at the restaurant with Sophie. Bring the baby to the restaurant so everybody could meet her. And this is like a beautiful sequence. I had loved seeing, by the way, Jeremy Allen White, who I just didn't even think about how rarely he smiles on this show. There's a moment where he sees the baby, and it seems like the actor himself just breaks into this wide smile, that just kind of like unequivocal smile looking at the baby. And not only just like is he breaking character there, which I thought was fun to watch, but I'm like, man, how rarely do we see this guy smile on the show? This is one of the very few times. And of course, importantly, at the end of this episode, Sydney also gets a call that her dad is in the hospital, suffering a heart attack. And then the next episode is called Sophie. A couple really nice things here. We see Sydney at the hospital. She runs into Claire. They have Claire helps her talk things out. Sydney's obviously feels similarly somewhat to Carmi. And you know that a lot of the emotion here is not only her dad, it's this pressure. She feels like she's abandoning. Maybe she hasn't paid enough attention to her dad. She also feels like she might be abandoning her family by taking the Shapiro deal. So a lot of this is emotionally coming out in this interaction with Claire. We also, again, see that Claire is just this very decent person, of course. But for me, the thing in this episode, I think it's in this episode, it's kind of confusing where some of these things actually happen, that resonated the most for me. I loved seeing Pete and Sugar and the baby in bed together. And it like flashed me back to that moment when we had my daughter. And just like, there's chaos. The family comes over. They think they're helping. It's just like, oh God, just someone else to entertain. We just want to sleep. And like that moment of just like all laying down together. And for like a moment, it's peaceful and it's so perfect. And I love the fact that Sugar says, I wish it was like this all the time. And Pete says, do you? And again, this is the central theme of the season, which is like the chaos that drives you, the problem solving, that you're at your best when you're like, you have to constantly be improvising, but then like the want for peace. And then of course, if you had that all the time, would you just be bored with it? And then of course, how do we, all of us, this is the question for all of us in our lives, how do we find balance between those two things?
No, I agree with you. That was a super sweet moment that also brought me back as well. And I often have had that idea of, let me just live in this moment forever. So I could definitely relate to it.
Oh, one more thing to bring up here during that. I mean, maybe when they're in bed together, this conversation that spikes up multiple times because it is going to pay a dividend later, which is, of course, this started in season 3, but for some reason, it's like a comedic highlight of the whole season, by the way. For some reason, that Sugar and Francie Fack hate each other. And we see these text messages back and forth that even it looks like Francie has tried to reach out and her responses are always like, F you, I hate you, whatever. Yeah. And she almost writes something really nasty again. But she doesn't. At least she doesn't respond negatively. And we do eventually find, or I should say, meet Francie Fack. So we'll save that for the next episode. So, of course, all of this is not only this kind of moment of repose and kind of resetting as well to find out that at least Sydney's dad is okay. And then we get to episode 7, Bears. Okay. So the last time all these people, this family, was all in one place together, we had an episode called Fishes. And boy, was that a disastrous episode. And prefaced, by the way, in the previous episode, people are worried, oh my God, Donna is going to come to the wedding. I brought this up, by the way, in my solo episode, I forgot to mention this as well. I don't know why, but I forgot it again, which is I forgot to mention that earlier on, Dee Dee has now reactivated her real estate license.
Right.
She's trying to sell Jimmy's house. So Jimmy apparently has legitimate financial problems, not only the restaurant, but which of course makes it a little more endearing that he, obviously we just thought he was just some rich guy who was throwing money around, but apparently he needed this money and he sunk it into business. So he really has been taking bad bets on this family because he really does truly love them. And this is actually all laid out explicitly in this particular Bears episode. And this whole episode, this 1 hour, is the exact opposite of Fishes, talking about mirroring episodes.
So, yes, I
This
agree completely.
this entire episode is not about how this family in the same room boils over all these animosities and sabotage each other intentionally and unintentionally. It is all about this healing of every possible rift the show's ever had. In some ways, it really does feel here at this moment. I'm like, well, this must be the final season of the show.
Right.
They're healing everything here in one shot. But yeah, tell me what you think about this wedding where the bears all end up in their little bear cave together. And very important that all those bears, very importantly, are not just the Berzatos. It's this very large extended family of bears now at this point.
I loved it. I think with Fishes, where I thought it took the chaos maybe a couple of steps too far.
Yes.
You know, like it really
driving through the house.
The intensity. Yeah. Here, I really appreciated we still had all of the cameos or at least, a decent amount of cameos. Got to see Bob Odenkirk again, which I loved. And, a lot of those same themes as in Fishes, but presented in such a different way, so much calmer. I love the idea of everyone gathering below the table without hesitation, as they all just one by one discover what's going on in there. I love the interactions regarding Frank and everybody's feelings about, well, he's a great guy. What are you going to do? That must suck for you. I loved all of it. I thought it was really beautifully done.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, everybody's here, even the other celebrities like Frank, played by
Josh Hartnett.
Yes, of course. Which, of course, that wasn't in the Fishes episode, but even those now extended characters as well. Francie Fack shows up as well. And of course, you knew it was going to be a celebrity, the way it's been teased out for over a season. And it's Brie Larson here playing Francie Fack. Looking beautiful, by the way, and not looking like Captain Marvel, which is how I normally see her recently. So healing everything, even the whole Francie Fack situation as well. And I loved seeing them all under there. I love that whole way where this is not a show that is subtly written once again. And they all sit down and they go, what is everyone's greatest fear? And how they go around. Some people answer honestly, some people not so honestly. But I like how Carmi dodges the question a few times. And finally, Claire is like, well, what was your answer again? And he says, what is the opposite of chaos? And she says, peace. Once again, the theme of the season. And then he goes, oh, yeah, math. That's my biggest fear. But of course, we know exactly that's what it is, right? He's afraid he cannot operate without the chaos.
Yeah, which is the key thing that's going on here for the entire season. Sure. So they spelled it out for us, which I appreciate. I also
I said, just tell you what the show's about.
I also thought on the theme of him hating math, there was a great conversation between him and Sydney a couple episodes earlier about the apples, right? Where she's trying to explain and he's just so clearly not getting it.
Or the clock. Remember when they make the clock and he's like 3 months, 4 months? They're like 2 months.
Yes. So I do like that as a running joke. And also in this episode, I like the interactions between Debbie and Sydney, where Sydney kind of gets stuck talking to her, right? Or not. I don't know. Depends how you feel about it. But I did think that part of the episode was really well done as well. And you see Debbie's growth that she says, I think it's in this episode, she says she's not drinking anymore.
Yes.
And she decides to leave early, right? That she's put in her appearance. It's time to go. Like you see how much work she's been doing on herself.
The show, sometimes very on the nose, but sometimes subtle as well. I loved when you see Francine waiting to show the house and they, unspoken, of course, you just see her arrive, Jamie Lee Curtis, that is, and you see how utterly unattractive she made herself in previous appearances on the show. And as soon as you see her, which of course she's a real estate agent, she has to dress up for the event. But as soon as she walked in, I was like, oh, she's not drinking anymore. Like they didn't have to tell me that. I knew it immediately.
That's funny.
She just seemed like just in the fact that she was not only, seemed to be independently be able to set up the house and wait for the people to arrive. Hardly anybody does, but just those basic things, which she could not do before. She was a complete and utter mess, understandably, considering she had lost her son and still recovering from that as well. But yeah, this is a beautiful episode. I don't know what else to say. Everybody should just watch it. There's a lot of things that happen here. I love all those individual interactions of these people who sometimes are dreading each other or avoiding each other. For example, Sydney having only heard these terrible things about Dee Dee, and then having this really wonderful interaction. I thought, like, I got a little emotional when Dee Dee asks Sydney about Carmi, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he's one of the greatest in the world. I got into cooking
Yeah.
because of him."
Mhm.
And she just goes, "That's amazing." Just like accepting the fact that, like, my kid is one of the best people in the world at
Yeah.
something. That's just insane, right? And it was like, it really touched me. Actually, it's a really beautiful just interaction between the two of them. And also, I love the whole conversation where Bob Odenkirk's character is saying, like, "Yeah, we actually became friends after that blow up,"
Right.
and Carmi's like, "You're lying." And he's like, "No, it's actually true. I'm not just saying that." And then they're talking about, yeah, he would talk to me about the food you were preparing and the places you were working. And Carmi's just like, "Wow, that's so crazy." And again, I think it is thematically important in the show that it's about how all these things that you're dreading, like Carmi will not set foot in that house anymore. And it's like, just have a conversation, people. It seems to have
Yes.
solved all these problems between them.
Also, just a very funny episode with them sharing the gum and, oh, you quit smoking? Yeah, I quit. When did you
Yeah.
quit? I haven't. Like all of it.
Yeah. Thanks for the
Really
shitty
fun.
gum.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that is very funny. Yeah, and of course the other running gag that Carmi has quit. I believe the actor has quit smoking as well. And then there's
It
Marcus
pays off at
catches
the
him
end.
almost smoking. Yeah. Yes, of course it pays off at the end of the season also. Oh, and one last comedic bit here is we find out that it seems to be that the rift between Francine and Sugar was that they hooked up. They had some kind of romantic relationship previously. So that was a very funny reveal after all this. You're like, oh, did they steal a boyfriend? Whatever. No, apparently they hooked up and the other one of them goes to the other.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. That's what actually happened. I like how Pete's like, were you in love with her? He wants to know because this seems to go on for a long time.
Yeah, he's blindsided. Yeah.
Yeah, it's entertaining. And it turns out that whole congregation under the table was to get little Eva to dance, or actually to encourage her to. She doesn't have to dance if she doesn't have to, which I loved, by the way. Like, that is not how we were raised. It's like, you're gonna do it whether you like it or not. Yes, you're gonna wear this whether you like it or not. And they're just like, no, that's how I am with my daughter. It's like, oh, you don't have to. It makes you uncomfortable, but don't do it. Don't not do it for the wrong reason. But if you're not comfortable, then hey, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that, once again, just like all these other things we build up in our minds, that just that conversation makes it better. And not only that, everybody dances at the end, including Eva. She's willing to make
really sweet
to dance. So it's a really, really nice ending. And of course, by the way, Jeremy Allen White is playing Bruce Springsteen in this upcoming biopic, which they shot here in New Jersey. And the song they dance to is Tougher Than the Rest, which is Emmylou Harris's cover of the Bruce Springsteen song. So it's, I think, maybe a little Easter egg there. I'm not sure. Okay, next episode is called Green. This is called Green because there is a green sweatshirt that Carmi needs to reclaim from Donna's house in the next episode. So that's it. That's why it's called Green. I mean, green means other things too. It's like food can be green. Green is like evergreen.
Right.
Green is like new to something. You're green, right? So, I mean, there could be symbolism there as well. But not that much happens here. Tina finally cracks the code on, making the dish faster. Partially with Luca's assistance, and Sydney
floored
does.
That you can say not that much happens here, but go ahead.
Well, because Sydney declines the Shapiro job. Is that what you mean?
No, because of the conversation between Carmi and his mom.
Oh no, that's the next episode.
Oh, and this one is called Green?
This one's called Green. Yes. Yep. The next episode, Sona, is called Tonato, and we know that. We know why that is.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. By the way, I confused this in my solo recap as well. I'm like, wait a second, that didn't happen in that episode. So I had to re-edit my recap as well because I had the same confusion you did. Because honestly, not that much happens in this particular episode.
Gotcha. Okay.
Oh, there's one important thing that happens here. A couple of important things. One is Luca and Sydney talk to each other, and there's a little chemistry between the two of them. Do you think that if there's another season, that they may actually let Sydney have a love life?
Interesting. Yes, I noticed the chemistry as well. And I think we've seen chemistry between her and Carm as well, and also
Yep.
between her and Marcus. So I think
Yes.
she would have choices if they decided to do that.
Exactly. Like there's a whole thing where Marcus kind of made a move on her last season and got awkward.
Right.
But she wasn't into that. But like I said, this was just like kind of unspoken. They just seemed to have a very easy chemistry. I mean, that could just mean that he'll be working at the restaurant as an actual full-time employee and develop that chemistry. But maybe it becomes something romantic. We know nothing of her love life, if she even has one, in this show.
Right.
And that's the case for most of these people, by the way, I guess, who work very long hours. There's that really nasty interaction where she rejects Shapiro, which honestly doesn't make sense. He's right. They are literally thinking that the bear might have to have the plug pulled on it imminently. And she's making this decision, which does seem like not the best for your career, you'd assume.
I agree, but we do know about him that he's not the greatest guy, right, from the episodes at ever. So I think she is making a choice to stick with people of a more solid character than he has.
There's a very cool moment there where Luca finally, Tina has like measured out all of her ingredients and done every possible hack to make her dish on time. And then Luca's just like, hey, can you throw together a quick pasta dish for the other employee, the front of house girl whose name escapes me right now. I love her character, by the way, but I can't remember. And she's like, oh, sure. And she does it in 2.5 minutes. So there you go. He's just like, you got to get out of your head sometimes. And he shows her, he's like, look, 2.5 minutes. And she smiles and she goes, I can do it. I am no longer the bottleneck in production. I have achieved greatness. Made a pasta dish in the correct amount of time. I'm being facetious there, but actually this is their achievement right there. So, and then there's very importantly this conversation where Natalie says, hey, these numbers look good to the computer, right? He goes, yeah, they do. They actually look really good. And she goes, this is great, right? The business is afloat. And he just lays it out to her going like, yeah, you guys have done great. You guys are profitable. The parachute ends. And of course, this kind of is a setup for the question mark that looms over this whole show. You now have operational budget. You can survive without this additional buffer of cash. And she goes, that's good, right? We can keep this going. And he says, but why would you? Like you're probably not going to get much more efficient. Even if you get a little bit more efficient, what is your cash flow going to be? And, you hit a bad stretch, like another pandemic hits or something, you guys will immediately go out of business because you're living off of your cash flow. And he goes, why would you do this? And on the one hand, that is the pragmatic, how do I maximize the money I've invested in this business and in the real estate here? I could probably cash out right now and make more money than I do in operating the restaurant. And then, of course, not subtly at all, she looks up. And when he says, why would you keep doing this? There is that board of the photographs of all the employees, her family, this extended family, the bears. That's why you do it. So the bears can have purpose in life. Very important about having purpose in life, by the way. A couple of things I forgot to mention. Got to talk about Richie for a minute. First of all, I think in episode 2, he prays, which I thought was a beautiful moment. I don't think he believes in a traditional way, but I did love hearing him say in this prayer, please let the restaurant stay afloat because it's the only thing that connects me to the world anymore.
Yes.
And then later on, very importantly, we have this conversation he has with Jimmy at the wedding where he's talking about William Friedkin, another one of his favorite directors, that William Friedkin had given an interview. I've actually heard this interview. And he went to see a Zen garden when he was in Japan and he'd never seen one before. And he's like, what is everybody talking about? And he went and he looked and he just was blown away by just this simplicity of these rocks and the sand between them and the patterns within the sand. And then in this really, I thought, really well done sequence, Richie is realizing that he is not one of these planets, one of these rocks in this.
Right.
He is the sand that connects them all, and that he finds purpose in that instead of being like, I need to be the star, going back to like, I should have been an actor, that kind of way that he described himself earlier. It's not like, oh, I'm not the one who's supposed to be the star. I'm not the one that's supposed to be drawing attention to myself. I'm the one who makes this thing that connects the dots between all these things. And you do think about the experience, speaking about how he has this affinity for these directors, Ridley Scott and Michael Mann and William Friedkin, all these references he makes here. That whole idea of he's going to have the snow and we're going to have the sandwich. He's the director. He's making the experience for everybody else. And
Right.
I think that that is very important, that Richie needs to realize that it's not about him screaming and everybody looking at him. It's about him orchestrating the event and this experience for other people. Okay. So then by the end of that episode, we have two seeds planted here. One is that Dee Dee has been harassing Carmi about these photographs, a box of photographs that he found in his apartment that he said, I got to return it to you. And she's like, oh, you got to bring it over. And he had brought this up to Claire earlier. Once again, they seem to slowly, honestly, what I had said to my wife, that like, this is a totally unrealistic interaction about this, kind of trying to make amends after the breakup. That what happens in the wedding is exactly how it would play. It was exactly what I had said. Like, that's what's actually going to happen. You're going to tenuously a little bit and then be like, well, let's hang out and then we'll see what happens next.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how things go. You see them, their flirtation reactivates. And one of the things she does, of course, is gives him a little mission. Can you find my favorite green sweatshirt? And of course, that all leads literally, I think, directly from him walking up the stairs at the end of episode 8, if I recall correctly. And then in episode 9, showing up at the door. And Dee Dee's there, of course. He has his box of photographs. Another really beautiful sequence, I thought, when you think about how utterly catastrophic their relationship was and how damaged she is, that she's just looking through these photographs and he is suddenly seeing her not as this, or at least understanding her more, but then realizing all the things she's gone through. And these photographs, of course, so important to her. It is the person she was before all the good and bad things happen in her life. And of course, again, the theme that he has not had a life. He doesn't know who he is, as he says by the end of the season.
The scene between Carmi and his mom was amazing. First of all, again, we don't see anyone going to therapy, but everyone has done a lot of work
yes.
on themselves. For her,
he says that explicitly, right? I'm working on it.
Yes, he says it many times throughout the season. For her, based on what we've seen of her before, for her to be able to plainly say to her child, I'm sorry, I should have done better, I think is something that so many people need and want to hear from their parents, but for so many reasons, parents can't say that, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I think, we were talking before about whether this is a therapeutic experience for the audience. I think it can be therapeutic to think about what it would be like to hear that from your own parent if you're one of those people. And I loved Carmi's reaction to it, of not trying to stop her, not trying to add to the conversation, just letting her say her piece, taking it all in. And then like the ultimate act of his love of preparing something for her to eat after. I just thought all of it was so beautiful.
Yeah. And it's so funny too, when she's like, I'll make you something to eat. And you think about her frenetically trying to feed everybody in the family and putting that pressure on herself. And of course, very importantly, I think, I didn't think about this until I was doing the solo episode, but you think about how frantically she's trying to cook 20 things at the same time. And again, Carmi's decision-making over the course of this entire season, where he's observing more than he is acting, but learning as he observes. Very important. That's like, to your point, sometimes you got to be quiet and listen, and you learn a lot that way. And he listens to his mom and this woman who like tormented him unintentionally throughout his life, sometimes intentionally, probably as well. And him coming to the realization he is like her in that way, right? That he's creating this chaos in the restaurant. And as opposed to her being like, oh, now I'm going to go cook for you. And he's like, no, I'm going to cook something for you. And of course, immediately, or I did anyway, as I was watching this, exactly what he was going to prepare for her. It's the dish that she recalled fondly when she was in Italy, right? And that's the tonnato sauce. It's some kind of sauce with tomato, but it's got milk in it too. So anyway, he's like, "Oh, I know what that is." And yeah, this is a really touching episode for sure. And then some other plot stuff happens. Ibraheem and the beef and his partnership with Albert, that whole thing is continuing to evolve. They have the conversation, of course, with the computer. Albert meets with the computer and talks about how that spinoff can be successful. And he's like, this is a good idea. And I do find it funny that Jimmy's basically there because it's like, look, we have less than 24 hours. We're just kind of having this kind of final conversation about you guys have to make a decision, what happens after we hit zero, et cetera, and so forth. But then all of a sudden the computer is like, oh, wait a second, this is very interesting, and forces him to have that conversation. So, of course, another thread left open for potentially extending this if they want to. And of course, another very important thing, that Food and Wine review comes out, and they also name Marcus as one of the best new chefs, and which, of course, another big, just showing Marcus's huge evolution in the show. And by the way, I think specifically more so even in season 3, I touched on this already, but this actor, I think he was a comedian beforehand, had very limited experience. And as far as like Marcus becoming this chef, this is elite chef here, and you see him like writing some of these episodes as well. Just the idea that this Lionel Boyce himself has had this evolution just in the course of these 3 years that the show's been on the air, that he's become really obviously upped his game in the same way that the character has. So just and he's like, it gets kind of MVP an award here at the end of the season or at the end of the show potentially. And then of course Pete finally at the very end of this episode talks to Sydney and says, "Have you read it?" And she's like, "I didn't really understand it." And is like, "Well, Carmi's no longer part of the partnership deal."
Dun,
and all
dun,
of that.
dun.
Yeah, dun, 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 indeed. And then, of course, that all sets up episode 10, which is just a conversation. The whole thing, it immediately follows episode 9. The clock on the wall is ticking down. It's the final hour of this. The episode is called Goodbye. And the whole thing is a conversation between Sydney and Carmi. And eventually Richie joins the conversation where she is just laying it all out there going, "You're abandoning us? So you're quitting? You're leaving me this with all of this? Oh, thanks a lot." And his struggle to explain to her, "No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to quit like I have in the past or not take responsibility for my actions. I'm trying to get out of the way because that's what you guys need." And then this argument as to whether that is true or not. And then, of course, Richie jumps in as well. So my first question to you is, how do you think this all played out? And do you think Carmi's making the right decision?
I understood the decision to change the contract, but I was surprised that that meant he was going to leave the restaurant entirely. I thought it was going to be like, "I believe in you all so much. I want you to have the stake in it. I am going to be here to support you." I was
Right.
not prepared for him to say like, "And I'm going." And I'm not sure that was a decision that makes sense for this situation. He throughout the season showed himself to be capable of giving over so many of the decisions that previously he had been holding so close and understanding the benefits of doing that. I don't think it really had to come to this for purposes of the restaurant. Maybe it did have to come to this for purposes of kind of saving himself and changing his whole approach to life. That is a very hard thing to explain, though, to somebody who's already mad at you. So I thought this was really interesting how it all played out. And I think this actually would be a very appropriate end for the show.
Right.
Especially with us as the audience knowing that they have this option to extend the sandwich part of this business to get the extra cash
Right.
that they need. I could definitely live with this being the end. I feel like it won't be, though.
Yeah, I agree. One important detail here to bring up is, of course, that there's been this animosity towards Carmi this whole entire time about his inability to deal with reality. And maybe this is another version of him quitting and him trying to explain, no, this is different this time. That's why he keeps bringing up the fact that I did go to Mikey's funeral, because I think that, and it's strange that he keeps saying that over and over again. And everybody's, they keep harping on that, because I do think that matters, because there's a difference between someone who goes like, no, I was there, And this, by the way, was not me shirking responsibility. I think it's best for the restaurant. And I do promise that I will stick around and make the restaurant work. But even if I do stick around to work at the restaurant, it is not my restaurant anymore. It's not mine. And it's not because I want to quit. It's because I'm the thing that's getting in the way. And I think that is really, once again, going back to this idea of therapy, I think it's a beautiful revelation. But me, like, having, and I think this is the beauty of this show, having a vested interest in the actual, like, as if these are real people and I want the best for them. I do. And I've heard creative people say this before. I do hope that he is able to see that, like, yeah, you need to have a life and then bring that into your creative endeavors, because that's what will feed the creative endeavors. You can't just be a really good technician that imitates other people's food or repeats the stuff that you like in other people's food. You need to have your own perspective. That doesn't mean you quit the thing. It just means that you need to balance those things. And maybe he understands, I do not have balance right now. I can't do that. So maybe it is what's best for him in the moment to step away. But I do hope that he does come to that, that there could be a work-life balance or a passion-life balance in this particular case as well. And like you mentioned, it could be the end here, but not from a plot perspective. I think that in your mind, there's not like you feel like this chapter is closing. As a matter of fact, even though it's called goodbye and we literally see the clock tick down to zero, all it means is that now they have their own destiny in their own hands. Does it just become a sandwich shop again, a very successful one? That's what it was in the first place, right? Even more successful maybe now than it was before. Do they just run as this restaurant and they're accepting the fact that they're going to have a fixed menu and they may not get a Michelin star, but they're a staple in the neighborhood and they generate cash, and that pays for these people to be together? Is that enough? Does that make them happy? Maybe. And then, of course, we have all these dangling threads about what's going to happen with, are they going to franchise? And some of this, I have to say, it does feel like it is maybe a requirement that Hulu basically asked them. Hulu is the producer here, the Jimmy character, who gave them the money to make this esoteric restaurant. But they got to throw them a bone and go like, hey, can we have a franchise? Maybe there's going to be a spinoff show with Rob Reiner and Ibraheem and, making sandwiches. Or, maybe there is another version of the show where, it's Luca and Sydney running the restaurant. Maybe the way I read this, by the way, in my solo recap is this Christopher Storer saying like, thank you, Hulu, for funding this project. And I am Carmi and I am stepping away from this. That doesn't mean the show goes away, but maybe as far as Christopher Storer, the creator of this whole thing, maybe he steps away. So I do wonder, maybe that's too neat of a reading, but I do wonder if that's the case, because it does feel like something is ending here, but I can't quite put my finger on what that is. One thing is for sure, these people are very busy. So it's going to be hard to get them all together again to churn out one of these shows every single year when they're all making movies and writing things and, a whole bunch of other stuff. But we will see. All right. Any final thoughts?
I have one final thought.
Yes, please.
What's up with Marcus and his dad, man?
Oh, I know. That's another thing that I feel is like a dangling thread for maybe something to come. And that's where I feel like there might be some franchise servicing here itself, not only in like he's leaving enough, seeding enough possible spin-off shows in this finale, which kind of feels incomplete in a weird sort of way. And that's another perfect example of, Marcus and his dad, that is like so unexplored, other than like, the mom died. He's alienated from his dad. The dad multiple times asks him to meet up. He almost does meet. So I guess that's a step in the right direction, but it is odd that, it seems like so incomplete in so many ways. Of course, there is over and over again the theme of the absentee father in or toxic father in all of these seasons of the show, except for Sydney, who has a wonderful father. And then, of course, terrified of losing him. But one more unresolved element of the show. I think that's it. Anything else?
I'm interested to see what the reception of this is. I
Yes. Mhm.
purposefully try and not hear too much about it because while I enjoyed this and I enjoy this evolution of the show, I'm not sure how it's going to land for a lot of people.
I think people are going to be not that satisfied with this, to be honest.
Mm.
And I found it very funny that in season 3, not only was there kind of an audience backlash for sure, but I find it interesting that this of the 4 shows has the lowest critic ratings as well. It's still positive, but it's the lowest of them all. But I was reading through some of these like little blurbs, the excerpts from the reviews, and over again, the positive reviews are like, what an improvement from the disastrous season 3. But season 3 has like a 90 something percent Rotten Tomato score. So I feel like the general consensus for season 3 after the fact became even worse, that people were like, well, it's uneven, but I liked it, to like, that was kind of bad. And I'm like, my opinion has not changed on season 3. I
I've
still think,
enjoyed all of
yeah,
it.
I mean, season 2 is brilliant. It's so well made and really has barely a miss in it. And season 3 had incredibly high highs. I think the best moments of season 3 were better than season 4, but and it had uneven moments. And this season 2 is uneven for sure. But I mean, it's very much the show it wants to be. And you kind of, like a family, you just got to kind of take the good with the bad. It's like the show is asking you to be on its vibe. And I am okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, every season has had something different to offer, and I have enjoyed all of it. Even, nothing is perfect all the time, right? I mean, maybe a
Sure.
single season of television could be
Right. Right.
perfect, but once you start making multiple seasons, you set a high standard that you are bound to not meet at certain points. But I really enjoy this evolution of the characters, even if it is somewhat miraculous, um,
Yes.
as far as how I know real people to be. I love seeing it. And I think there is so much in the family dynamics of these people that is so relatable. And I enjoy seeing the evolution of that dynamic.
With season 1 of the show, I don't know if I would have watched it all the way through if it wasn't a binge, because it was so stressful. I'm like, I don't know if I had to go come back to it every week, I may have quit on it earlier, but watching it as a binge worked. And of course it was released as a binge. And then when season 2 came out, each one of those episodes I thought were so perfect that I said to you when we were discussing season 3, I'm like, man, I really wish, because I'm always, just for the health of the podcast, I'm always looking for something we can discuss week to
Sure.
week. And I was like, man, they should have gone week to week with season 2 of that show. It would have been the conversation every single week. The audience would have grown from week to week, instead of being a binge. The irony there, of course, was that season 3 was so uneven. I was very happy to watch it as a binge because the highs, you kind of forget the worst parts of it, and really resonated with me, at least like napkins and some of the best episodes of that season were so really, really strong, some of the strongest ever. And now the funniest thing about this season is that this season was a binge for sure, because
Mm.
there are like 2 or 3 episodes in a row that are so chill sometimes, which I enjoyed, but they're so chill that you're just kind of like, click next.
Yes,
What's the
agree.
next episode?
Agree.
So I can't imagine, like, for example, episode 2 or episode 3 having been like a weekly discussion. I'm like, what were we talking about? This person made the dish on time. Okay, what else happened this week? Okay, let's talk about something else. And by the way, I like that. It is about being self-reflective and streamlining processes and finding joy in the mundane. So the show has to be that too. It can't be like an action movie and talking about how it's so great when we just have peace in our lives again. It's 2 very different things. So anyway, all that is to say that of all the seasons, this one was probably most apropos as a binge. All right, Sona. So enjoy your vacation time.
Thank you. You too.
I'm off from work, so I will probably do something. Maybe I'll do a recap of my favorite movies of the year, since we're right at the midpoint now. Something like that. Something solo. So stay tuned. I'll try to put something out in the feed. This is for the audience, of course. And Sona, you and I next week, next Friday, I believe, if possible. we will be discussing the new Dexter TV series
Yes.
premiering next week. So that will be our week to week binge. And man, this thing looks bonkers, but
I know you're ready to hate it. I know you are.
I'm trying. You know what? I definitely am ready to hate it. I found the trailer very entertaining, though. Like in a way where I'm like, oh my god! Like it's the meme of Michael Jackson throwing the popcorn into his mouth. I'm like, oh man, what's this going to be like? You know, and it could be a train wreck for sure. But yeah, I mean that's not necessarily a bad thing for
Right.
conversation. So I am very curious. And I mean the show very much seems in on the joke. So I don't know if it's going to be a straight up disaster or not, but I am very curious to check it out. And later this week, also, I will be starting to discuss Smoke a week to week with Darren. Did you watch Smoke, by the way, Sona? Did you check
I
out?
haven't. Should I?
I'm on the fence on it. I have to say that there is something very strange that happens in early in the show, but I think it's a setup for something else. This is very vague conversation.
Yes.
But what I would say is check out the first half of the pilot episode. It is just the POV of a firefighter in a house that is basically burning around him. And it is so terrifying. It is so well done, which I think is very important because the show is very much thematically about someone who is in love with the danger of the fire and the power of it as well. And, you have to really sell that. And I thought the show did one thing absolutely brilliantly, not many things brilliantly, to be honest, but the way they executed this opening sequence was incredible. It's like truly incredible. So you're really beautifully produced. So do check out the beginning of that episode and see if you're curious to check it out. I don't know if it's going to be a good show or not yet. But like I said, I have a feeling, I have not looked ahead, but I have a feeling that we are being set up for a twist in this first couple of episodes. So maybe I think like depending on how that twist lands, I'll give you my final decision. But anybody who's watching week to week, you can have that experience week to week with me and Darren as we go through it. Anyway, so we'll be back with that conversation on Smoke and, of course, the conversation regarding the first couple, I think 2 episodes premiere next week of the Dexter series. So how can they keep resurrecting Dexter? Let's find out.
We're going to find out.
Resurrection. All right. Thanks again for the conversation, Sona.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.